There's a stretch of the Ingram Glacier where the ice doesn't look like the rest. Not the clear blue-white of old compression, but darker, bruised almost. Step onto it, and even through insulated layers, the cold feels sharper, as if it pierces bone. Climbers who cross that section sometimes talk about sounds, muffled beneath their boots, rhythms, knocks. They joke about it, but never for long. Because once you hear it, you realize the mountain isn't quiet at all. That glacier holds things in its frozen depth, 40 feet thick in places. Inside that ice rests the disaster of 1981. 11 climbers trapped where the mountain swallowed them. Some say you can still feel them there, clawing at the silence. Or maybe that's just how the mountain wants you to imagine it. Mount Rainier rises to 14,410 feet, its massive body dominating the Seattle horizon on days when the sky clears. To locals, it's simply the mountain. To the first peoples who lived in its shadow for thousands of years, it bore many names. The Lushootseed called it CO.AG, the sky wiper, the one who brushes the heavens. The Cowlitz spoke of it as Tacoma, Turkkamcham, names that carried a warning settlers never listened to until tragedy made the meaning plain. Every year, more than 10,000 people attempt to reach the summit. Half succeed, the rest turn back, defeated by exhaustion, weather, or fear. Most return to tell the story. Not all do. Since records began in 1897, over 400 people have died within Mount Rainier National Park, more than 100 on its climbing routes. The mountain keeps many of them forever. Bodies that once fought to stand above it are buried inside its shifting glaciers, slowly carried downward as the ice moves. They become part of the mountain itself. The first documented death set the pattern. July 27, 1897. Edgar McClure, a chemistry professor from the University of Oregon, had climbed high on Rainier's flank. He carried a barometer on his back, the kind used to measure elevation. Heavy, awkward, never meant for such precarious ground. From a narrow outcrop, he called up to his companions, "Don't come down here, it's too steep." Those words were his last. Weighted by his instrument, thrown off balance in the dark, McClure slipped. He slid into a ravine and was killed on the rocks below. The mountain had taken its first documented victim. Today, a rock formation at 7,385 feet bears his name, McClure Rock. A reminder carved into stone that Rainier tolerates no mistakes. The years that followed proved the lesson again and again. Climbers fell into crevasses hidden beneath thin snow bridges. Some were lost to avalanches. Others disappeared without trace. The mountain's indifference was absolute. Skill didn't matter. Caution didn't matter. Even the strongest could be taken in a moment. In 1946, Rainier claimed 32 Marines at once when their transport plane slammed into the South Tahoma Glacier. The wreckage was swallowed whole, sealed beneath ice. For decades, nothing remained visible. Then slowly, the glacier began to release its grip, scattering pieces of the plane down its slope as if returning the bodies one fragment at a time. Until 1981, that single crash was Rainier's deadliest event. The avalanche of '81 changed everything. The climbing party had set out from Paradise, full of hope, 23 clients and 6 guides, eager for the summit. By the time they reached Ingram Flats, conditions had shifted. The guides debated, weighing risks against the will of their clients. By dawn, the mountain made its choice for them. At 5:56 a.m., the glacier broke. Ice the size of buildings tore free and thundered downward. 11 vanished in seconds, their bodies sealed beneath 40 feet of ice and snow. That morning redefined Rainier. Before, its dead came one at a time, maybe a handful together. But the scale of loss in 1981 marked it differently. It became not just a mountain of beauty, but of mass graves, of frozen tombs that move with the slow grind of centuries. The families of the victims never saw them returned. Instead, they were left with the cruel truth. The glacier would keep their loved ones until it decided otherwise. Standing at Paradise today, it's easy to be fooled. On a clear morning, Rainier looks almost peaceful. Snow glitters on its ridges. The sky washes it in light. But that surface calm hides what climbers and rescuers already know. Inside the ice, death waits. Sometimes it reveals itself all at once, with avalanches and collapsing seracs. Sometimes it holds its silence, letting decades pass before surrendering what it has taken. The mountain doesn't forget, it doesn't forgive, it simply waits. The climbing party that set out from Paradise that Saturday, June 20th, 1981, looked like so many others before it. 23 clients and 6 professional guides, bound together by ambition, nerves, and the fragile belief that training could stand up to the mountain. The company leading them, Rainier Mountaineering Incorporated, had taught them the basics just the day before. Ice axe arrests, rope techniques, the rhythm of moving as a team. Enough to get them upward, at least in theory, enough to create the illusion that this ancient mountain could be measured, mapped, and managed. By afternoon, they had reached Camp Muir at 10,000 feet, pitching tents on that rocky saddle between the Cowlitz and Nisqually glaciers. The weather was steady, skies clear, spirits high. For many of the climbers, it was their first time at such altitude. They laughed, they traded stories, they believed the summit was already within their grasp. In those hours, there was no sense of what the mountain was preparing. At 2:30 a.m., they woke under a ceiling of stars. Headlamps flickered in the dark, ropes tightened into lines, breath steaming against the cold. By 3:30, they were climbing, the night air ringing with the scrape of crampons against ice. Guide Peter Whitaker knew the route better than most. His family had lived it. His uncle Jim had been the first American to stand on Everest's summit. Mountains ran in their blood, and Peter carried that knowledge with him. But knowledge has no sway over chance. The group crossed the Cowlitz Glacier without trouble, slipping through Cathedral Rock's gap as the first hints of daylight brushed the horizon. By the time they reached Ingram Flats, the sun was fully up. The ice above them groaned with the sound of shifting blocks, the glacier restless in the morning light. 3 clients were already spent. Altitude had turned their steps into lead, their lungs into bellows. Guide Christopher Lynch volunteered to turn back with them, leading the exhausted trio down toward camp. The rest, 20 strong, pressed on toward Disappointment Cleaver, that looming spine of rock that rises like a blade toward the upper mountain. Senior guide John Day was uneasy. 2 feet of fresh snow had fallen overnight, layering the slopes in white. He heard the glacier's voice, low creaks, sudden cracks that echoed like warnings. With Whitaker and fellow guide Michael Thoreau, Day pushed upward a few hundred feet to scout the terrain. He wanted to know if the snow would hold or if the whole face was ready to give way. Below them, guides Ronald Wilson and Thomas O'Brien stayed with the clients, resting at 11,200 feet in the shadow of the Cleaver. The scouting party hadn't gone far when Day made his decision. The snow hadn't bonded. Beneath the thin crust, the weight of the mountain shifted uneasily. It was too dangerous. He turned back, ready to call off the climb, but the mountain never gave him that chance. At 5:56 a.m., it happened. A wall of ice nearly 300 feet wide split from the glacier above. Thousands of tons of ice and snow broke free, accelerating down the slope with the weight of a freight train. Whitaker heard it first. That impossible sound, deep and guttural, a rumble rising from inside the mountain itself. He turned and all he saw was white, a cloud expanding upward, blotting out where his clients had been moments before. The avalanche swept across Ingram Flats with unstoppable force. Some were buried instantly, smothered before they could draw breath. Others were thrown, carried nearly 800 feet down the slope, tossed into crevasses like rag dolls. The debris piled 40 feet deep, ice and rock heaped upon itself in a frozen tide. When the roar subsided, silence pressed down heavier than the snow. 11 were gone. Day, Turot, and Whitaker stood frozen, staring at the devastation below them, unable to move. The mountain had made its choice. The survivors, including the guides who had scouted ahead, were left standing just far enough away to be untouched, yet close enough to feel the scale of what had been taken. Descending with the 3 clients, Christopher Lynch heard it too. The thunder, the hiss, the unmistakable collapse of glacier into ruin. He turned just in time to see the cloud boiling above Disappointment Cleaver, rising higher than the sky should allow. His radio crackled as he called down to Paradise. His voice carried the truth long before rescuers could confirm it. This was not survivable. By Sunday afternoon, word had spread. Rescuers gathered at Paradise, preparing for what they already knew would not be a rescue. Lou and Jim Whitaker joined them, legends in mountaineering, standing alongside National Park Service rangers and volunteers from the Mountain Rescue Association. They climbed to Camp Muir that evening, only to be beaten back by weather. The mountain would not even allow them to see the burial ground until the following day. When they finally reached the site Monday afternoon, the reality was undeniable. The debris field stretched wide, deep, and merciless. Probing with long poles, they found bodies entombed beneath layers of ice, unreachable. The 11 were gone. Ronald Farrell, 29 years old. Thomas O'Brien, 19, one of the guides who had stayed behind with his clients. And 9 others, their dreams of a summit ending in an instant at Ingram Flats. Their names are carved into a plaque at Paradise. Their bodies remain with the mountain, moving ever so slowly with the glacier's crawl, absorbed into its history. The inquiry afterward lasted hours. Survivors testified. Experts examined conditions. The verdict was unanimous. This was chance. No one to blame. No one at fault. The guides had done what training dictated, made decisions any professional would. But mountains are not bound by rules. They keep their own schedules, their own laws. And on that Sunday morning in 1981, Rainier decided to take. The rescue team reached Ingram Flats on Monday, after the storm lifted its curtain just long enough to let them climb. What they found was no longer a mountain slope, but a graveyard sculpted by ice. The avalanche field stretched across the glacier like a scar. The debris was not simply snow. It was boulders of ice fused together, jagged, unyielding, stacked in heaps that seemed deliberately arranged to hide what lay beneath. They carried poles long and sharp, driving them into the drifts with the grim hope of striking flesh beneath. Some poles met only snow, others struck against something deep, something unmoving, a body preserved already in the mountain's grip. Too deep to pull free, too deep to return. The names of the lost were written afterward, carved into plaques and lists. But in that moment, they were only absences. Voices that no longer answered, headlamps that no longer glowed. 11 people erased in a single minute. Farrell, only 29. O'Brien, barely 19, still a boy guiding others up into a world of ice. The rest, clients who had dreamed of touching the summit, their ambitions buried with them. The searchers stood among the wreckage and understood what the families already feared. No rescue was possible. Not here. Not with 40 feet of ice locking its jaws around the fallen. The mountain had taken them, and the mountain does not give back. The Board of Inquiry convened later, gathering testimony from survivors, guides, and experts. Their conclusion was simple and cold. This was chance, a random fracture, unpredictable, unstoppable. The guides had done nothing wrong. They had followed protocol. They had respected the risks. And still, it had happened. The mountain had moved, and when the mountain decides, nothing human can resist it. That truth settled into the climbing world like a sickness. The 1981 disaster remains the deadliest single climbing accident in American history. No storm of bullets, no battlefield, no man-made explosion, just ice, snow, and gravity rearranged by time and weight until it chose to fall. The routes changed after that. New protocols were drawn, camps shifted, safety emphasized in ways that tried to outwit memory. But all of it was an illusion. Ingram Glacier still creaks with the same voice. Its blocks still collapse without warning. The danger was never gone, only disguised. In July of 2018, it happened again. A section of the glacier gave way in the middle of the night. Ice the size of apartment buildings tumbled down the route, carving a path 1,000 vertical feet long. In the morning, guides walked through the aftermath, staring at a field of destruction. One of them whispered words that were not for comfort, but truth. This would have been an unsurvivable event. By chance alone, no climbers had been there that night. The mountain had thrown its weight into emptiness, its strike landing on silence instead of flesh. But the message was clear. The Ingram had not changed. It would never change. And still, it was not the deadliest path. That title belongs to Liberty Ridge, a cruel and narrow line that cuts across the north face. Climbers speak of it with awe, calling it bold, striking. They also call it cursed. 2% of summit attempts take that route, but it accounts for a quarter of the deaths. The ridge offers no retreat, no mercy. 4,000 feet of exposure, ice and rock collapsing without warning, storms that trap and smother. Once committed, there is no escape. On May 31, 2014, 6 climbers set out upon it. 2 guides, veterans of the mountain, 4 clients chasing a summit. For 2 days, their progress was steady. On the evening of May 28th, they called in at 12,800 feet. The weather was clear. Spirits were high. They would push to the summit in the morning. That was the last time anyone heard them alive. When they failed to return, helicopters searched the route. On June 1st, the truth revealed itself. A debris field on the Carbon Glacier, scattered with equipment, tents, fragments of color against the endless white. The avalanche beacons told the rest. All 6 were buried beneath the ice. They had fallen 3,300 feet, a plunge so great the glacier became concrete beneath them. No survivors, no bodies retrieved. The Park Service declared the site too dangerous. Rockfall, icefall, the ridge itself repelled rescue. And so the 6 join the others the mountain keeps, their stories ending in silence. The mountain is patient. Its ice grinds down stone over centuries. Its glaciers shift with the rhythm of time itself. Human lives, ours, are nothing but blips against that scale. Ingram, Liberty Ridge, Carbon Glacier. These are not routes. They are waiting rooms, and the mountain decides when they close. The names inscribed on memorials may endure, but the bodies are carried downward, deeper each year, folded into the white mass until they vanish entirely. To climb Rainier is to stand on top of the dead. To hear the ice shift is to know you are trespassing among graves. And when the mountain moves again, as it always will, it will not matter who you are, how skilled or how careful. It will decide. The mountain does not always take in great numbers. More often it claims 1 or 2 at a time, silent strikes that barely register beyond the ridges. But each death carries its own shadow, and sometimes the cruelty feels deliberate, as though Rainier chooses not just the victim, but the irony. August 13th, 1995. A rescue mission on the Emmons Glacier turned into tragedy. Philip Otis, 22, and Shaw Ryan, 23, were climbing to save a man named John Gravier, who had broken his ankle high on the descent. Gravier needed a helicopter. He needed stabilization. Otis and Ryan were the ones pushing upward to bring help. They were almost there, only 200 feet below him, when Otis slipped. The ice was glassy, treacherous. In an instant, both men were pulled into the void. Roped together, they tumbled 1,300 feet down the glacier, their bodies shattering against ice and rock. They died trying to save a man who lived. Ryan's death cut deepest, the first ranger in Rainier's history to be killed in the line of duty. Among those who guard the mountain, his absence lingers still, whispered in hushed tones at the base where every rescuer knows the risks. 1 week later, as if the mountain wanted to hammer the point home, 3 novice climbers fell from nearly the same place. Scott Porter, Carl Ahrens, and Brian Nelson were descending when one of them slipped at 13,400 feet. Bound by rope, they were dragged together into a fall no one could stop. From Camp Sherman, a volunteer watched it unfold through binoculars. 30 seconds of helpless acceleration. He saw 3 black figures streaking against the white slope, heard nothing. The silence haunted him most. 2 died instantly. Nelson survived, but his body was broken. His life changed forever. Rainier has patterns like this. Echoes, a death followed by another, as if one is never enough. The mountain's indifference seems almost purposeful in those moments, repeating itself to remind anyone who doubts. But the names change, the faces change, while the story stays the same. In March 1979, years before these falls, the mountain had already shown how little it cared for reputation or experience. Willie Unsold, a legend in mountaineering, one of the first Americans to climb Everest by its West Ridge, led a group of 21 Evergreen State College students up Rainier. He had survived peaks across the world. He had stared down avalanches, storms, thin air, and lived. But knowledge does not buy safety here. They failed to summit. On the descent, a storm hit with savage force. Visibility collapsed into blindness. Temperatures plummeted. Hypothermia stalked every rope team. Unsold had to choose. Instead of the longer but safer Cathedral Gap route, he led them into Cadaver Gap, a name heavy with warning. As the first team stepped down, the slope fractured. A slab avalanche broke loose, 3 feet thick and wide enough to sweep everything in its path. Unsold and student Janie Diepenbrock were carried 1,000 feet down the mountain. She died instantly. He lingered for hours before succumbing to his injuries. The irony was bitter. A man who had survived the highest, most dangerous mountains in the world was undone here, on a descent he thought would save time. Rainier does not honor fame. It does not bend for skill. Novice or master, the ice makes no distinction. And when it takes, it does not always bury forever. Sometimes the mountain holds its victims for decades, frozen in stasis. Other times, the glaciers loosen their grip, spitting the dead back into the world like grim offerings. In 2014, rangers found human remains melting from the Carbon Glacier, equipment and clothing suggesting a death from the 1970s or 1980s. The body was never named, never claimed. Another life swallowed, returned as a mystery. The glaciers are changing now, shrinking under the pull of warmer years. As they retreat, they release their dead more quickly, like coffins cracking open. Marines from 1946 reappear in fragments of uniform and steel. Climbers from the 60s surface, still dressed in gear of their time, faces preserved in ice. Each one a time capsule, a warning, a reminder of what waits beneath the snow. The mountain reveals and conceals at will. It decides who remains hidden and who returns to haunt the living. Numbers, cold, clinical numbers. That's how the Park Service keeps its records. And yet behind every digit is a name, a story, an unfinished life. Between 1897 and 2018, at least 84 climbers died on Mount Rainier. Another 25 lost their lives in climbing-related accidents that didn't even involve summits. The figures feel abstract, distant, as if they belong to a chart, not to faces or voices. But each number was someone who woke that morning believing they would descend. Each believed they'd see their families again. The mountain thinks differently. To it, those years are moments. Those deaths are less than footsteps. The single deadliest year was 1981, when the Ingram disaster erased 11 lives in a single sweep of snow. The second came in 2014, when separate accidents bled into one another. The 6 who vanished on Liberty Ridge among them. Rainier does not keep safe years. There are only years when it takes fewer. Solo climbers know this truth best. In June of 2023, 80-year-old Dorsey Eddy set out alone for the summit. He was last seen at 8:30 p.m., moving uphill through Cathedral Gap, still steady, still breathing strong. When he didn't return, search teams scoured the mountain for 6 days. They found him at 11,500 feet, his body resting on the Ingram direct route. No one knows what happened. Perhaps a slip, perhaps weather, perhaps nothing more than the mountain deciding he had walked far enough. He died alone, the glacier closing around him, another secret the mountain will not explain. Rainier does not choose by age. The youngest victim was only 11 years old, the oldest in their 80s. It takes guides and clients alike, experts with decades of experience and first-timers with fresh boots, cautious souls and reckless dreamers. The mountain does not sort or sift. It does not weigh fairness. It takes indifferently. Technology has done little to blunt the edge. GPS guides climbers across the slopes. Beacons chirp when buried bodies need to be found. Radios and satellite phones connect summits to civilization. But when Rainier shifts, when ice collapses or storms drop from nowhere, all of it is useless. Steel, plastic, signals in the air, none of it stands against the avalanche. None of it argues with gravity. Weather is one of the mountain's sharpest weapons. Rainier creates storms out of calm, summoning whiteouts from clear skies in minutes. Winds can scream at 100 miles per hour on the upper slopes. Temperatures plunge 40 degrees in less than an hour. Climbers can be just steps from camp and never find it, wandering in circles until exhaustion pulls them down. Some sit just to rest and never rise again. The mountain preserves them where they fall, frozen into its skin until time or thaw brings them back. Rescue teams do their best, but there are boundaries even they cannot cross. Helicopters wait at altitudes they cannot exceed. Rangers train endlessly, preparing for rope extractions, avalanche searches, desperate recoveries. But above certain points, under certain skies, no one comes. The mountain enforces its own isolation. If you are caught there, you remain there. For those who do survive, the scars are not always visible. Guides who watch their clients vanish. Climbers who felt the rope snap or saw their partners fall into bottomless blue. Rangers who have pulled body after body from the snow, the faces never leaving their dreams. Trauma walks down the mountain with them, quiet and patient, as permanent as frostbite in the mind. One veteran guide tried once to describe it. The sound ice makes before it collapses. A groaning, deep and alien, like a steel beam twisting, like something alive straining against its cage. He said, once you've heard it followed by death, you will never forget it. You will hear it again, in your sleep, in the quiet hours, even when the nearest glacier is hundreds of miles away. Families carry their own ghosts. Some never see a body. There is no funeral, no burial, no marker. Just the knowledge that their loved one is still there somewhere. Frozen, silent, carried inch by inch downhill inside the ice. Maybe decades later, a fragment of clothing or bone will emerge at a glacier's edge. By then, everyone who waited for them may already be gone. Closure is a word the mountain does not recognize. The mountain does not kill only in avalanches and storms. Sometimes it chooses smaller ways. Cracks that open where none existed, gases that seep invisibly from its buried heart. Even in silence, it waits. In 1999, a tremor too faint to be felt on the surface carved new wounds into the Winthrop Glacier. A party from international mountain guides was traversing what had been, just days before, a trusted route. Catherine Walsh was third on the rope when the snow bridge beneath her collapsed. She fell 60 feet into the crevasse, its walls sheer and polished by ice, impossible to climb. At first, rescuers thought time was on their side, but there was something else at the bottom, the breath of the volcano itself. Carbon dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, invisible, odorless, suffocating. Walsh was unconscious within minutes, gone before they could reach her. They pulled her body up, worked on her for an hour, chest compressions, desperate breaths. Nothing brought her back. The mountain had killed her not with snow or rock, but with its exhalation, a sigh of poison from beneath the ice. 2 weeks later, another shift sealed the crevasse entirely. The wound vanished, the scar closed. It was as if she had never fallen at all. This is how Rainier works. It erases its crimes. It hides its dead. The 1981 victims are still buried, carried downward slowly by the glacier's ancient crawl. The Park Service no longer searches. Perhaps decades from now, fragments will emerge. Scraps of fabric, a boot, a bone. By then, those who once spoke their names will be gone, and they will return not as people, but as artifacts. Like the Marines from 1946, whose plane was swallowed whole and only released piece by piece, scattered metal among the stones. This is how the mountain measures time. Not in years, not in lives, but in centuries. What feels eternal to us is only a moment to it. Every weekend, climbers still gather at Paradise. They shoulder their packs, they rope together, they climb into the same white silence that devoured those before them. They have read the stories, they know the numbers, but knowledge is not belief, and belief disappears once the rope pulls tight, once the crevasse yawns on either side, once the groan of ice above makes you feel as if the mountain itself is shifting its weight to look down on you. Frank Martinez learned that in 2018. His team was ascending the Ingraham Glacier when their weight loosed a small avalanche. Not enough to kill, only to throw them into confusion. Ropes tangled, footing lost. Struggling to stand, Martinez drove his hand into snow, and it fell through into emptiness. He widened the hole, shone his headlamp down. 20 feet below, he saw a man in a red parka, seated looking up at him. The figure didn't move. Frosted goggles reflected the beam. Martinez realized with horror the man was dead, frozen upright as though waiting. But he wasn't alone. All along the narrow shelves of ice were others, bodies stacked by decades, preserved like offerings. Some from the 60s, their gear old and heavy. One from the 20s, canvas stiff and brittle. 11 in all, suspended at different depths, as if the crevasse had been arranging them. Rescuers recovered the most recent victim, a man named Thomas Nuon, who had vanished 3 weeks before. The others remained. Martinez never climbed again. He said later that it wasn't just the bodies that haunted him, it was their posture, their placement, as if the mountain had been collecting them carefully, one era after another, like specimens in a cabinet. Rainier does not let go. It stores, it organizes, it waits. Some will say this hunger is only in our minds, that it's human instinct to imagine malice in ice and stone. But stand above a crevasse filled with the dead and try not to feel it. The deliberate silence, the weight of years pressing upward through blue ice. Try not to hear the echoes when the wind cuts wrong and the glacier groans like a thing alive. The mountain is not careless. The mountain is patient. The mountain does not sleep when the sun goes down. In winter 2019, a team of researchers placed cameras high on the Emmons Glacier, instruments meant to study avalanches. Most of what they captured was ordinary. snow shifting, ice splintering, shadows moving with the wind. But at night between 2 and 3 in the morning, something else appeared. Figures, human shapes sliding into frame, climbing where no rope team should be. At first, the scientists dismissed it as a trick of light, shadows, glare. But then they looked closer. The movements were wrong, too smooth, too quick. The figures rose from crevasses, moved together in perfect rhythm, then vanished at the edges of the screen. When they slowed the footage, details emerged. Gear from different times, a helmet style from the 1970s, canvas clothing from the 1940s, outdated packs that should have rotted decades ago. In one sequence, a figure turned to the camera. Its face appeared for 3 frames. The researchers who saw it would not describe what they had seen. 2 resigned from the project immediately. 6 weeks later, the camera failed. Not broken, not crushed. When the maintenance team retrieved it, they found it filled with ice. Not covered, not frozen over. Filled as if water had seeped through sealed housing and solidified inside. The memory card was destroyed. The project ended quietly, files locked away, whispers passing only between climbers who know the mountain well enough to fear it. They wonder, do the bodies resting in the ice stay still, or do they move? Do they walk the slopes they died upon, visible only to machines and to the unlucky who stumble into their path? These are the thoughts that come in the small hours, intense pitched at 10,000 feet, when the wind in the canvas sounds like voices and the glacier's groaning sounds like footsteps. When you remember how many dead lie beneath you, carried slowly by the ice, and wonder if they are only passengers or something more. Rainier is beautiful from a distance. From Seattle, it is majestic, luminous, a crown of snow over the horizon. But up close, when you stand on its skin, you feel it differently. You sense the hunger in its silence. You feel its patience in every shifting groan of the ice. Climbers still come. They always will. They believe they are different, stronger, better prepared. They believe that statistics belong to others. They believe the mountain will let them pass. Most are right. They reach the summit or they turn back alive. They descend with photographs, stories, plans for the next climb. But not all. Some join the collection: Edgar McClure, Ronald Farrell, Thomas O'Brien, Matt Hegeman, Shaw Ryan, Catherine Walsh, and the many whose names we know only because they never returned. The mountain waits with infinite patience. It has stood here for 500,000 years. It will stand for hundreds of thousands more. Our lives, our struggles, our deaths, they are less than moments to it. The ice moves, the rock falls, the clouds close in, and the story repeats. 1 death here, 6 there, 11 in a very bad year. Maybe one day it will erupt, and all these tragedies will seem small. The surveys warn it is one of the most dangerous volcanoes in the world, not because it erupts often, but because when it does, the destruction will be vast. Entire valleys would be drowned in mud and ash. Towns, highways, people, all erased. The mountain's silence would end in fire. But until that day, it kills one at a time, quietly, without explanation, without mercy. Those who climb Rainier believe they will make it back. They always believe, and yet the mountain keeps its own list, etched in ice and stone, written in names no one will ever read. It adds to that list patiently, waiting for the next misstep, the next storm, the next crack in the snow. Perhaps one day that list will hold your name. The mountain keeps its secrets, buried in ice and silence, revealing them only in fragments. A boot, a frozen face, a whisper caught on film. Maybe that's why we keep returning, not just for the summit, but for the mystery of what waits in the dark. So tell me, if you stood at the base of Rainier, knowing its history, would you climb? Would you risk becoming part of its collection? Share your thoughts below. I want to hear them. And if this story unsettled you, if it left you with that chill you can't quite shake, then join me again. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because there are more places like this. Places where nature watches, waits, and reminds us who's really in charge. The mountain is patient. The question is, are you?